Welcome to the CEO series. This series of extensive interviews focuses on senior level executives across the globe, looking at timely issues, change, disruptions, affecting not only their organizations, but the people within. We dig deep into the dynamics affecting those two pillars. Today, our guest is Dave Forman, one of the titans in the HR profession and a mentor of mine. He is the former Chief Learning Officer of the Human Capital Institute. He's an adjunct professor of Pepperdine School of Business. His last book was a global bestseller, Fearless HR. Now he is bringing more knowledge in his new book, Fearless Talent Choices, which we will discuss today. Okay, for the Facebook people that are out there, thank you for hanging with us. This was our first go live, and there's technical issues behind it. So we are live now. So thank you all for taking time out to listen to us today. We have a very special guest, longtime friend who basically brought me into the HR facilitation space, and an icon in our profession, Dave Forman. Thank you. Dave is in California and is now, I think, 8 a.m. So thank you for making time for us today. So let's start. I did the intro earlier. Your new book, very excited to hear. The prior book, Fearless HR, was a global bestseller. So let's think about Fearless Talent Choices, which is the title of your new book. In light of the pandemic, the big change initiatives that organizations are going through now post-virus, can you kind of walk us through as to how HR is going to have to change to step up to the plate? I mean, we've all heard about seat at the table, but I think it's kind of beyond that now.
Well, first of all, Ron, thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be working with you again after more than a decade of experience. And
yes.
To be halfway around the world and linked up and talking about these things is just great. So it's a distinct pleasure for me. And yes, this coincides with the launch of my latest book, Fearless Talent Choices. And, it took about 3 years to write. It's a book not just for HR professionals, but for business leaders of all types and at all levels. I think that's what's one of the things that's demanded these days, is that regardless of your title or your position or where your office is, we all have the opportunity to lead the organization. And this is really about how to unleash talent to improve the organization and drive business results, and how perhaps our past views about how to do this have been not wrong, but limited. And I think the times demand a different approach. I mean, if we take a step back and sort of see what's happening out in the world, in addition to the things that have directly impacted us so dramatically over the past 2 months, and in fact, 2 weeks, we see unrelenting change. The period of stability has long vanished, and we have to be able to embrace change and not fight it. Global interdependence. We're not just interconnected, but we so much depend on each other all around the globe. The world's a smaller place now.
Yeah.
And something that happens in one place can be on your doorstep in a flash. So, let's think about how we can start to anticipate some of these things, have a bit of a bigger picture view, and not just focus on our company or our industry, but really the world around us, because it has such dramatic impacts. And then, of course, the uncertain future, uncertain prospects. It's not just unrelenting change, is we're not sure where things are going to end up. And it's difficult to kind of think about preparation and readiness in those contexts. And so that's why I wrote this book. And Tom Friedman had a column several weeks ago talking about the pandemic, and he said, we should all separate our time, BC and AC, which is before coronavirus and after coronavirus.
Yeah.
And of course, we might add a little something to that says DC, which is during coronavirus. I'm not sure we can even quite foresee what after, means. And he said, anybody writing a book or doing something like this should just stop and just take a couple deep breaths and think about, how this context and this environment has changed. And so I did. It took me about 3 years to write this book. I took essentially three to 4 weeks off to contemplate how the key themes might be different, and or are they still important in today's world? And so that was a very interesting kind of reality test for the approach that I've taken and what I'm trying to articulate as we go forward. So it certainly did have an impact, and I came away thinking that certain chapters are even much, much more significant than I could have imagined when I was writing them in the BC period, thinking about the AC period going forward. So it's timely. The book is going to be released next week. It's available on Amazon in a paperback as well as a Kindle form. There are certainly sections that deal with what can we take away from this experience, as painful and as difficult and as wrenching as it has been, that can help us do a better job preparing the workforce for a stronger future going forward. So that's just a quick kind of overview. I'll be glad to kind of talk about the 6 talent choices and why the words fearless. Fearless is in the midst of all this turbulence, we have to have conviction. We have to be bold. Timid messages just aren't going to work. They're going to get lost in all the distraction. It is about talent. Certainly, it's different as we think about talent practices now. I would imagine external hiring is going to be quite different. A lot of organizations are saying, look, let's really understand what we've got in our talent and how we can better leverage and unleash that talent to be able to address the issues that are going to be coming in front of us as we recover from the pandemic, and hopefully as we readjust some of our social values and the way in which we do business. So talent is critical, and choices, these are things we can choose to do or not. They're big kind of directional strategic shifts, and they take strength to do. But I think if we don't do them, we're sort of faced with a situation of, are things really going to change or be very different?
So, in your first book, Fearless HR, as I said, was a global bestseller. What was the transition point from the first book to this book? So the new talent choices is about talent within, and that being the driving factor of an organization's success. So kind of walk us through the mindset that as you were thinking about writing another book and using the other one as a foundation.
Well, as you point out, Fearless HR, and Ron, I wasn't sure how it was going to be received in the marketplace, but it did turn out to be a book that's being used in companies and organizations and universities all around the world. One of the joys that I get is to get emails from people in places that I hardly heard of, asking for, what do you mean by this tool, or how can we apply this model? And it really is about how the HR profession can be bolder and stronger, and not just be a partner, but a player, not just be a participant, but a leader in driving the business forward. And it's really interesting because some of the latest books that have come out between the two, 2015 Fearless HR, 2020 Fearless Talent Choices, are saying the same thing. I mean, Ram Charan has said, there really should be a subset of 3 people that lead the organization.
Right.
The CEO, the CFO, who looks after financial capital, and the Chief Human Resource Officer, who looks after human capital. And those are the 3 people that should be almost a subset, of the
Dave,
C-suite going forward. Yes.
Dave, we lost your video.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, buddy. I screen went blank there, but I will get it back on. There we go.
There we go.
I don't know if that's good or bad that it's back on, but it's now back on.
That's cool. You mentioned Ram Charan's book, Talent Wins. That was a terrific book, and I see your book is kind of a take on from that. So I'm noticing a mindset shift from leaders now, and I don't know whether that's a temporary thing, being more concerned about people and talent within the organization. So for senior leaders that's probably listening to us now, what advice would you give them post-virus?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think re-engaging the organization, employing what we know. I mean, one of the things I tried to do, Ron, and from how we've worked together over the past decade or so, is to try and look at people whose work I really respect and appreciate, and look for commonalities, kind of connect the dots. And sometimes, especially academic literature, I found doesn't do that so well, because part of the criteria there is if what I'm working on is unique or different, I have to prove my uniqueness and why what I'm doing in my research is different. And I don't kind of connect the dots or see the congruence amongst all studies. So one chapter in my current book is about high-performing organizations and how we can create what I call a force multiplier effect. And part of this is, what's the secret sauce of high-performance organizations? And what I say is, there is none. There is none. We know what these factors are. And so I look at not just Talent Wins, but I look at 11 other investigations about high-performance organizations. And you start to lay out their findings, and there is a remarkable consistency in what people like Dan Pink and what people like Eric Barton and what people like Paul Zak and even Gallup's original work. There's a remarkable consistency. And so let's focus on kind of those commonalities and do a much better job operationalizing them. And so I think that's a key thing. Jeffrey Pfeffer from Stanford wrote a book with his colleagues a long while ago called The Knowing-Doing Gap. We know so much, but yet we're not doing a whole lot better. And we have to be better at the execution piece, and we have to be better at standing on the shoulders of others who have done really good research and then connecting the dots. I mean, Steve Jobs says that's really what creativity is, it's connecting the dots. And I'm not sure a number of other sources do that as well. They're very interested in espousing their own research and perspective, but they're not looking to connect the dots. And I think that's a missing piece.
In your book, you mentioned the 6 choices. Would you want to walk us through that and share your screen and walk us through that graphic? And the other thing I'll tell the audience while you're doing that is that one of the things about Dave's book, there's a lot of templates and tools that an organization can use, very rich in collateral that we can use within the organization.
I appreciate that, Ron, and that is one of the things I tried to do is to create actionable tools that people can use to try to operationalize some of the key concepts. So yeah, let me kind of show the framework of the book here, and we can chat about it as we go through. Okay. So let me do this here if I can. All right. You have to forgive my
That's
forgive
okay.
how long it takes me here, buddy. But there we go. There we
That's
go.
okay. That's okay.
So here are the 6 chapters of Fearless Talent Choices. And as you can see, the first one is business driven. Is what we're doing in our teams, in wherever we work in the organization. Is it in the best interest of the business? Are we aligned and focused in terms of what's important to the business? When a car is out of alignment, it wanders all over the road and is hard to handle. When an organization is out of alignment, tremendous amount of resources and time and talent are wasted. And this is a pretty simple question, but it's very, very easy to kind of get out of sync and to be very busy and to work very hard, but not doing things that are driving the business and the organization forward. So, how can we think about a strategic alignment test? How can we start to employ a competitive differentiation map? How can we look at a SWOT analysis and say, hey, how are we making this picture better? Are we maximizing our strengths? Are we minimizing our weaknesses? Are we magnifying our opportunities? And are we mitigating risks? And those are all ways to make sure that what we're doing is the business's agenda, not what necessarily we think the business's agenda is.
Yeah.
So that's the first piece. And I think especially as we think about the after pandemic era and how businesses get back, this is going to be even more important than ever. The story I tell here about focus is when Steve Jobs came back to Apple and he got his executive team around the table and said, hey, let's think about all the neat things we could do to put a ding in the universe, to really make things different or better for people using our technology. And so they came up with this great list and exciting things and had great discussions. And then he stopped after getting this list together and said, okay, now we pick 4 because that's all we can do.
Okay.
And I think in light of this coming back from the pandemic, hopefully in the DC and AC period, really focusing on the critical few is going to be very, very important for businesses and organizations to get healthy again.
That's a good point. Let me just
right.
make one statement here. That's a great point because strategy you had coming into the virus, all of that's disrupted. And in order to move it to whatever that level would be, that means rethinking everything. And the challenge I have from my side is when I talk to senior HR people and I ask them what is the organization's strategy, they give me kind of that HR look as that they don't have a clue as to what that is. So that's a key point about business driven because you understand the business first and foremost. So thank you for letting me just throw that in.
No, I think you're right. I think this is one of those, one of the 6 choices here that is even more important than I could have imagined when I wrote about it. There's, one of the little practical tools here, again, is a simple test of strategy and strategic intent, but especially given restarting businesses is what are we going to stop doing that we were doing before? What are we going to start doing that maybe we weren't doing before? And what are we going to continue doing? And it's a real simple set of 3 questions, but it causes you to take a step back and think about what's important, that we can't do everything, especially at a time of limited consumer confidence and hesitation in the marketplace. What are we truly going to focus on? So it is a very important choice for sure. Number 2, lead time ahead. This one is painfully clear in terms of thinking about what might happen and how we can better prepare and be ready for what is likely to occur. And none of us can predict the future. I know we've used these terms before, Ron. I think I've heard you use them. We can't predict the future, but we can prepare for possible futures. And that's what we should be doing. That's what leaders at all levels should be doing. It's not just a strategic workforce planning issue. Again, we need to have a bigger picture view of what's happening around the world. What are the external factors that can buffet our organizations and dramatically influence our strategy, as we have certainly seen, in the past, turbulent couple of months together. And the key word here is anticipate. How can we start to anticipate so that we do a better job preparing and be ready for the future going forward? Number 3 is about being a force multiplier. And again, the terminology here, I thought about, I wanted to use business terminology as opposed to HR terminology or, other terminology. These are things that are engineering terms, that are scientific terms. How can we be a force multiplier? How can we create a workplace that will allow the workforce to thrive, to be able to achieve its potential? And this is where, again, looking at all the research around high performing workplaces, and what you see is there's a tremendous consistency. And I'll show you that picture in just a bit too. I won't go over all of it, but a lot of it should be very familiar to you. Again, the question is, how can we operationalize this so that we're optimizing the talent capabilities that we have? The network builder piece, number 4, is about how to make smart organizations that learn from each other, that learn from mistakes, that are greater than the sum of their parts. Nothing frustrates a CEO or a managing director more than having all these smart people, but yet continuing to make the same mistakes and continuing to kind of be buffeted by all the barriers that reduce productivity and allow us not to work as effectively as we can. And of course, here's where you get into the notion of agile teams and being able to act quickly and across disciplines, self-governing teams. Some really interesting examples coming out of China and other places about how to do a good job here. And this is also where I introduced the notion of, how we've looked at talent has varied over the years. Initially, the primary metaphor was the war for talent. Yeah. So kind of at the individual level, get the brightest and the smartest people in the organization and good things will happen, And sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. We all, I'm sure, have examples of organizations that had a lot of smart people but didn't make the right choices. And Dave Ulrich, in a book he wrote a couple of years ago called Victory Through Organization, said, you know what? Let's move away from that war for talent metaphor as the primary view of talent and think about how we create organizations and cultures that allow talent to flourish. And if we can think about cultivating a garden as opposed to picking a flower, maybe that's a better way to think about how to create a more enduring organizational culture. And I think that's right. He said, when you do that, his research said you return 4 times the value to the organization than just simply focusing on individual talent. And then comes work by Marcus Buckingham and other people saying, yeah, that's right. But you know what? Most of the work done today is done in teams, done in squads. The whole organization doesn't work on one thing. So let's kind of focus, on teams and squads and think about what we know about high performing teams and try to think about that. So the notion of moving from individual talent, the organizational talent, team talent, I think is a very important idea to keep in mind as we think about, the talent within the organization itself. I'll do these 2, Ron, and then I'll be quiet. And please ask any and all questions, or if people are entering on chat.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was the garden, the green. So my metaphor always has been a greenhouse. And you think in terms of the metaphor for greenhouse, you bring a seed in, you water, you You give it sunlight, fertilize, some are gonna grow, some don't grow. But what happens with that is you're able to deploy from one greenhouse to wherever they're needed inside of the organization. So I laughed when I read that, in the brief of your book.
Mhm. I think that's exactly right. And I think these little word images and word pictures to help kind of think about these differences become very important. Like, is our view of talent a singular view or a plural view? Is it the individual or is it the group? And the greenhouse is a great extension of that.
Yeah.
So number 5 is results-based accountability and owning business results and holding ourselves accountable for those results and being able to show the monetary impact of what effective talent practices and talent choices can return the organization. This was a big theme in Fearless HR, because I think the HR profession in general is sometimes insecure about the value it provides. And this is just kind of reinforcing that, if we look at our practices, we can see, for example, that if we, happen to lose somebody who's a high performing person in the organization, it costs the organization over $1 million, in replacing that person. And so, we need to be able to monetize the impact of what we do. And we need to hold ourselves accountable. Any high performing organization, accountability is a big part of that. Here in the United States, there's a company in Silicon Valley that talks about their culture. And this is a United States kind of example, so I apologize for that. But what they said is, it's part Peace Corps, where we all work together and are there for a common purpose. And it's part Marine Corps, where we hold ourselves accountable for moving the business forward. This isn't just a moment where we all, sing songs around the campfire. We have to improve the business for ourselves and our constituents and our customers, and holding ourselves accountable and owning that responsibility is extremely important. And then finally, this is Economy 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution, artificial intelligence, smart systems, the new technologies that are going to remake our landscape. And this is one where, before the pandemic and before Black Lives Matter and other things that are sweeping the world these days, I thought was going to be the biggest upheaval that we face. And there's a real emphasis when we talk about artificial intelligence and all these technologies to focus on the power of the technologies and how cool everything is. But it again is important to take a bigger picture view and look at past industrial revolutions and how, yes, a lot of progress was made, but a lot of people were left behind in making that progress. Yeah. And so we need a fuller picture view of not just the technology, but its impacts on society and organizations, so that what happens ahead of us is better than what we've done in the past. Yuval Noah Harari is one of my favorite authors, and his 3 books, but in Sapiens, he talks about, the past industrial revolutions. And I end the book actually with a phrase from him, just saying, we have to be better this time. We have to do better this time. And that's the challenge that, we face, not just with artificial intelligence, but with climate change, with the pandemic, with, other issues about having a more just and fair society going forward. And we have to be able to navigate, through the promise and peril of these remarkable times. So those are the 6 that I think we all need to be aware of. We all need to be practicing at some level to be able to better prepare our organizations.
When we talk about, the HRBP model, and we talk about, you know, optimizing talent within, what I'm afraid of, and then I hear this so often from HR leaders, is that the capabilities are not there. And maybe they would want to filter their organization through the 6 choices here, but leadership, and a lot of times, could be of a fixed mindset. Mm-hmm. And as they're trying to have this conversation to these leaders, fixed mindset, frozen mindset, whatever you want to call it, it's kind of an uphill battle. So how could we have a conversation with a senior leader to try and change the trajectory of business focus, but let's also pair that with a people focus? Mm-hmm. And if you could turn your video back on, it would be great.
Sure. Let me just do one thing.
Okay, go ahead.
Let me do this, and then I'll turn the video back on.
Okay, cool.
This is the high performance workplace model that I was talking about under a force multiplier. Looking at all the studies that have been done and the great consistency here that characterizes high performing workplaces and I just wanted to share that real briefly with your audience. I'm not going to go into all of these. The book certainly does, and a lot of it are things that you and your audience know. But just again, as a very practical example of lots of things here that we know, but we're just not doing them well. Somebody said some of these are common sense, and the reply is, yeah, they're common sense, but they're not common practice. We still are not doing what we should be doing. So I'll back out of here. Yeah.
Okay, so just hold that slide up for a second. I wanted to go back to the slide you just showed, the high performance model. Yep. In your book, do you go into each one of these? And as you said, it is common sense, but around serendipity, around embracing culture, does it take each one of those as a topic to give the audience a little more fluidity as to what it's about? Because in the global context, what we may assume from a U.S. perspective, from a global context, they may not be able to comprehend the meaning of it.
No, very good point. And yes, the chapter itself is, I think, almost 80 pages. Okay. And so each one of these has gone into in terms of definitions, what the research shows, what are some intentional actions that are being done around the globe to operationalize each one of these parts of the graphic, and what are some tools that we can start to use to help implementing them in our organizations.
Okay.
So this is far and away the biggest chapter in the book, and it could be a whole book by itself, but it is part of the picture. Yep.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So if you could pull that back and pull your video back up. As you were talking about the 4 virus, then the middle one is we're in the virus and coming out of the virus, BC, those terms you use. In change management, there's a 3-block model called Bridges Transition, which goes through those same 3 blocks. And I thought of that. You're not back yet, but I thought of that as you were walking through, that particular model, because in a lot of cases, a CEO that I spoke with told me about he does extensive note taking every day to capture what he's learning in this new process. Mm-hmm. What would you advise leaders to look for? And I think before, you had to go into the previous slide, my thought was, how do we have this conversation with leaders so they understand that the talent equation has to play just a stronger role as the P&L, or the KPI surrounding that? Did you ever figure out how to get that
I thought I did it.
Okay, there we are.
Okay. I
Okay,
got
so we're
unfrozen.
cool.
We're taking an unfrozen old guy like me, huh? Okay.
That's okay. That's okay.
Well, Ron, it's a good question. Being, in essentially a 40-year career, the good news is I see more and more CEOs getting it.
Okay.
And it's been incremental and it's been frustrating that it takes so long. But another reason for the two books that I've done is to try to compile evidence and positive best practices that for people who are open and willing to look at what others have done and what have proven to be successful, it can start to change. It can start to change their viewpoint. And some of it goes back to what we said right at the very beginning. This is a very different world, and stuff
Totally.
is happening all the time. And learning is a survival skill. I mean, it is a critical survival skill. And Eric Hoffer, a kind of a philosopher, a favorite of mine, says the future belongs to the learners, not the knowers.
Okay.
And it's the CEO from Microsoft says, don't be a know-it-all, be a learn-it-all. So I love your example of the CEO kind of taking notes and reflecting on what's happening and trying to make sense of it, as opposed to charging off and saying, no, it needs to be this way. I think for me, part of the journey of this book has been questioning some of the things that I've believed in for a long time, and that sometimes control isn't the best way to get results or to certainly get the buy-in of people. And so this notion of talent management, I think you and I have had this discussion a while.
Yeah.
The term is wrong. It may be something where, okay, it has a definition to it, but it's much more, talent management to me connotes control. I'm looking at you. Here's what you should be doing. I know what's best for you. Here it comes, as opposed to unleashing people and realizing human potential and being surprised and starting to expect of quote unquote ordinary people extraordinary performance, as opposed to just the people we call high potentials. I like in Ram Charan's book, one of the measures he says is, hey, every chief human resource officer should know their 5% and their 2%. And then, oh, okay, so what's that? Well, the 5% are those roles that are really critical to your recovery in the AC period. And they may be very different roles, to your point earlier, than they were in the BC period. What are those roles that are going to really be critical to our success going forward as we try to recover from this horrific experience? And then your 2% are who are your really top people, who are your really, really best people. And then he says, that's not enough, because the real issue is, are your 2% in your 5%? Are your best people working in those areas that are going to have the most significant impact to your organization going forward? And that's not going to be a perfect, maybe one of your best people is a research technician, not a brain surgeon, if you're a brain surgeon. But the basic idea is the right idea, but it also should not be a limiting idea. To say, hey, other people can get into that 2%, maybe they're misplaced, maybe they're in the wrong job, maybe something's going on at home. Let's unleash, let's have an open talent marketplace that give people the opportunity to not just survive, but thrive.
Yeah.
And so
well,
there's a little story in the book I'd seen before about how to control traffic. Do you use a roundabout or do you use a traffic signal?
I've seen that.
And it's you say, well, now what on earth does that have to do with what we're talking about here, But in the United States, we use, by and large, traffic signals. Around the world, traffic lights, thank you. Around the world is primarily roundabouts. And traffic lights give you the feeling of, gee, you're in control. It's a red light, so don't do anything. Oh, it's green, I can go. you look at the data, and the data will say, what's more safe for people? Where are less accidents? Where are less deaths? And time again, it's the roundabout, not the traffic signal. The traffic signal gives you this feeling that we're in control, it's clear, you don't have to think that much, which is part of the problem. Yeah. Whereas the roundabout, you kind of trust people to obey rules, they kind of work together, they collaborate together, far and away safer. And I think sometimes applying that metaphor or picture to our organizations can be very, very helpful.
That's an interesting case study. I read that full case study, that research report on that. And it's about empowering people, or do you not empower people by rules, and you still have all these hard rules. And I find in my region, in certain parts, I won't say, but in certain parts of the Middle East, you find that a lot, where there's a lot of rules and policies and everything to go by. And there's like an ABC, you do this, and the other, as opposed to the empowering concept of letting people make choices. I mean, within the context of making choices for the fluidity of the organization. One of the other key points that I wanted to make was the fact that you said that a reviewer was reading Fearless HR, and they addressed it as a business book as opposed to an HR book. So one of the things when I talk to HR people, I said, try and be perceived as a business person first and foremost, but your specialty just happens to sit in human resources.
I think you're exactly right. And to your question earlier, how did you evolve from one book to the other? That particular quote played a big role. Say, you know what? And subsequently, I had people looking at Fearless HR who worked in finance, who worked in IT as sort of partners, and they said, you know what? This really applies to what I'm doing as well. And one of my favorite quotes is from the Chief Human Resource Officer for Rio Tinto, which is I think the world's largest mining organization. And he said just what you said. He said, I don't think of myself as an HR leader at all. I think of myself as a business leader that focuses on people, culture, and organization. And I think that's a really great mindset, because it leads to a stronger credibility and relationship with your business peers.
So if we think of that three-prong approach, CEO, CFO, CHRO, for aspiring CHROs that are on the call, what kind of advice would you give them? You mentioned learning. Learning is going to play a big role moving forward. For someone that's new to mid-level in their career in human resources, what would you advise them, or how would you advise them to build on the foundation they have now, and that may be the process piece, to become a little more strategic in their approach?
Well, it's hopefully the book contributes to that, which is one of the reasons why I wrote it. And in the chapter on artificial intelligence and getting ready for smart systems, which actually could be a chapter on the pandemic and a chapter on, dealing with Black Lives Matter and the movement sweeping the world today. How do we deal with, cataclysmic change that really affects us? And I came up with 7 sort of learning skills that I think are very important as you think about what you could do to better prepare in your career as you move forward in this kind of period of turbulence. One is to recognize at the mindset level that learning is vital. If you don't take your notes as your CEO did, if you don't try to reflect and analyze, if you think you understand, you're wrong. So you have to want to learn. You have to not say, well, I've been in business 20 years and I know a lot, and no, that's for younger people to worry about. Wrong. Everybody, we're all newbies. We're all newbies in this. And so I think at your core, you have to believe that. Then the question of learning velocity. How quickly can you learn? So how quickly can you assimilate new information? And this is where being more multidisciplinary in your approach, I think, really helps, as opposed to kind of funneled or siloed. So that's why one of the underlying themes of Fearless Talent Choices is a bigger picture lens. Understand what's going on around the world with different examples so that you can adapt and learn quickly. So how quickly can you get up to speed? Learning velocity. Curiosity. This is maybe more of a trait, than a skill. But if you're not naturally curious, you can't say, now, why is that? What caused that? What's behind that? They say, most great innovation doesn't come when the scientist says, eureka. It comes from somebody saying, that's weird. Why'd that happen? So asking the question that gets at things, I think, is a very important trait. Anticipating change, what we've talked about, getting out of our little kind of narrow focus. Resilience. It is not a question of if we're going to get knocked down. And it's a question of what we do when we get back up. We're all going to get knocked down, given these types of changes that are occurring around us. And so how do we get back in the game? What's our core kind of belief in ourselves? And how do we ensure that we get back in the game and be a player? Resilience. Finally, influencing others, building relationships, getting a sense for what's important to other people. Dan Pink's work in this area I particularly like. And finally, systems thinking. How do we connect the dots and see the bigger picture? And these are kind of in order of importance, so the learning piece is right up there, being the most important, because as I say, it is a survival skill. If we don't do that, we're not going to be a player in the world that's coming ahead of us. So that's my take. These are not technical skills. These are not, go take this on coding or become a AI engineer. These are more learning how to learn. These are more like meta skills that can help you face almost any situation that you encounter.
Okay, cool.
So I think the notion of a multidisciplinary education is actually maybe some of the best preparation we can have. Too much specialization causes the blinders to occur. A really good new book called Range, where the author talks about a range of experiences and impacts, really is the best preparation we can have.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So the book will be out when again? Can you give us a plug on the book as the delivery date?
It's June 15th, so next week. So we are a week away. This is like a launch cast here for me. So again, I appreciate it. There's just a few little things going on with it, and you see, here's the galley copy right here.
Okay, cool.
Once I figure out how to get on.
Well, my order's already in Kindle, and I asked about the Audible version. But I thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll get this set up, and we'll have a copy of. We'll send it over to you soon.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure, and again, if there are follow-up things or information I can send to you, Ron, or your listeners, just please feel free to ask.
Okay, thank you so much. And good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.